invested, as I don't know if I told Ellie, but I've written 2 books, and writing books are a massive labor, getting them to the finish line and getting them published. But this curriculum was like triple the work of any book. I mean, writing a proper professional curriculum for schools, for educational settings, was by far the most work. I mean, an investment. We run a non-profit, but the amount of money and time and resources we put in, because just the resource material, it's all digital, it's all online. It's got animations which are hand drawn. It's got, tons of games, resources, and it's constantly being developed. We've got a whole association. We've trained teachers. We've trained over 100 facilitators now. We've got a franchise in Sweden. We've got people in Scotland now, a group that are teaching it, in South Africa, all over the UK. And so it's just been amazing. And it's it was completed in January, but it's gone so fast, the momentum of it. And we're also researching and evaluating it, just partnering with Northampton University at the same time. And so it's just amazing. It's been the biggest learning curve. And somehow when we go out to educators and people and show them the program, they're blown away. It's just speaking to them. So it feels like there's a way that we've been able to bring the principles to the outside world, beyond people who are interested in coming into the principles kind of circle, that are, that we don't call it the 3 principles. We don't mention that it's a resilience program. And people don't actually care what's in it. I mean, we speak about it, there's a language to it which is very relatable, but they just listen to the basic facts around it. They see, as Ellie says, it's been designed beautifully, it's very professional. And and most of these heads are like, this looks brilliant, we want this in our schools. So it's just been amazing.
Well, what I love about it is that it doesn't look this sounds like the wrong thing to say, but there's nothing off-putting about it. You know how some people could be off-put by the airy-fairiness of the principles or the spiritual nature or whatever. It's just very solid looking and feeling, isn't it? It really does tick. Yeah.
What was so interesting about it is that we had a psychologist who's a consultant to a grant fund, because we've been applying for grant funding. So the grant funding sent their consultant psychologist to come and watch us deliver the program to a group of kids in South London. And she read through the curriculum. Hi, Judy.
Hi. Sorry.
Hi. And she was so impressed by it that she not only recommended us for the funding, which we've now jointly applied. We have got the funding with this grant, but she also just came and trained in the curriculum. And has had all sessions, and she's now fully immersed in teaching the principles. And she was a psychologist. It was amazing.
That's really cool.
So that was really cool.
So Terry, who is in? Hi, Helen. Hi, Judy. Who is in your team that has created this amazing thing? Because what you said about getting the principles out to people who don't care about the principles is just what we're all trying to do, I suppose, to some extent. But it just sounds like you've got an incredible team there that are doing that.
Yeah, we have developed a great team, and we've got a great core team which is kind of expanding, and then we've also got people we're collaborating with and bring in for different projects. So we've got people who are used to working with kids who are struggling with crime, and they've been trained by us and they're collaborating. We've got someone who's just collaborated with us to work in Westminster University. We're spending a week there next week delivering to their first year law students. We've already delivered part of the program. So we've just found a lot of partners, so it's been exciting. I mean, we're still at the embryonic stages, we've done a lot. We've got a long way to go, but we're making good start.
And is part of that training people to deliver the program?
Yeah. And we found we've partnered one of the core members of our team, even though she's fully employed, but she's working a lot for us as an assistant head of a large secondary school. And she's one of the most superbly talented people in training teachers. She actually taught Mindfulness in Schools project. She trained hundreds of teachers, and she's now obviously teaching the principles, and she's kind of taught us how to train teachers, how to train them in a curriculum, what the teaching style of the curriculum, they call it the pedagogy is. So it's student-led, not teacher-led. So she's also been, we got very humble, and we thought, we know the principles, but we don't know the world of education and young people. So we've got an educational advisory team together with people quite high up in the education field. And so they've been teaching us a lot.
Wow, amazing. It's an amazing project, really incredible.
Exciting.
Oh, so welcome to people who are joining us. It's great to see you.
Hi, Terry.
Hello.
Terry?
Hi.
We have 2 Terrys and 2 Judys today.
And Terry even spells her name like me.
I
so
know.
that's really cool. Yeah.
So thank you, Terry R, for joining us. Yeah, it's a fairly small group tonight, but a couple more than I'd thought actually as well, which is nice. And Terry was just talking a little bit then, if you missed the start, about the iHeart program, which is a curriculum, and Terry's heavily involved now. I think nearly all of her work is around teaching the principles, but not really under the guise of the principles, to young people, and really helping young people in, I guess it's across the country, across the world now, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah. And I thought Terry had just written and published another book, but I learned just now that it was her husband who's done that. So what's the name?
He's got his name on this one as well, hasn't he?
Has he? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, they're quite small, so he
that's right. Yeah.
can do as much work as you, Terry.
These books would never get done if it wasn't for my husband, because he's got a passion for writing, and he takes my words and he puts them into the book. But all the books,
Wow.
Exquisite Mind as well, were only because of him. He does all the work. I mean, I get the glory, but he really sits there for the hundreds and hundreds of hours
Oh, bless
to get
him.
the book right. Yeah.
Wow.
We should have invited him on the call as well.
He can
You'll
join
probably
us.
see him on stage.
So I don't know, Terry, if you'd like to maybe kick us off just with a little bit of background around the book, and kind of how it did come into being, and what was going on, the reason that you kind of wrote it, and what you were trying to do with it, I guess. It'd be really nice to hear.
Well, I have to take myself back now.
Yeah, it's quite a while ago, isn't it?
Remember, yeah, exactly. But I think the Peaches book came about because for 2 reasons. I was writing weekly blogs for our email. We've got quite a big database, around 2,500 people, and I was writing a blog every week, which started off as like a small kind of learning or teaching, and then it became like a big blog. And a lot of work started to go into this blog. I used to spend hours, just kind of not reflecting, but I'd write it, I'd get the inspiration for it, and then I'd hone it in, and then Brian would edit it, and they were going out and they were very high quality. And what was happening with the blogs is that at a certain stage, I'd had a shift in my learning. I was spending a lot of time with Keith Blevins and Velda Munro, and some seeing this kind of deep logic of the principles. There was just shifting a lot of my learning, simplifying it and deepening it. And that was coming across, I was seeing so much in my clients and in my own life, and I was writing that in these blogs. And eventually we were getting so much feedback around the blogs. Really, people were so, like, I don't know, they were doing something for people that we just decided that we should collate them in a book. And there was a theme running through all the blogs. So we kind of felt like they fitted into a book. So that was the inspiration around writing the book. And I guess it was quite funny how the name came up, because we decided that we wanted some of the blogs to be illustrated. We actually would have liked them all to be illustrated, but we couldn't afford to have them all illustrated. So my good friend and colleague John Scott is very talented. He started to draw them, which is amazing. The thing I love about John, and he's animated all our animations for our curriculum, is literally drawn these animations. I'd write the script and he brought them to life. And I've never found someone who I can have a vision for something and he brings it to life better than I could even envisage it. So he started to play with drawing things for the blog, and the one, he drew this little cartoon of peaches and coconut, and kind of the peach thinking that they weren't resilient, and the coconut, thinking he wanted to be a coconut. And it was such a sweet thing, and it brought such a smile to our faces that it inspired me to write a new blog. So the next week I wrote a blog about the peach who thought she had to be a coconut. It was exactly the story of my life as a kid. You know, I'd look at all these other girls and think like they're the coconuts, I'm the peach, and I felt like, you know, you just had to kind of touch me and I'd bruise. It was all squishy. So it actually inspired me. And then we just thought, you know, my kids were always saying to me, I've got a lot of teenage boys, and they couldn't stand the name of all the 3 principal books, including my own. You know, like, you know, Exquisite Mind, Thought Revolution, Inside Out, this, the States of Mind. They were like, gosh, they're so boring. They gave me such a hard time. So when we told them this title, they were like, now that's a cool title. Like, at least that's interesting. So that's how the title of the book came about. And in a way, I'm not sure if it was a good thing or not, because it is an interesting title. But the fact is that I don't think that I think people somehow didn't realize how deep the essays in it were. You know, it almost just looks like a bit of a fun title or a light, or I don't know if it may be. And this is just a question I have. You know, I'm not, it is what it is, but I'm not sure if, because sometimes people would actually read the book and come to me and be very surprised and say, my gosh, I can't believe the depth of those essays. We weren't expecting it from the book. So it's almost like they expected the book to be a bit of a fun. So I think it kind of belies a little bit the depth of the essays in the book. So that was kind of the inspiration of the book. I think I was going through a new learning. Things were clarifying for me. They were coming to life around these essays. So I would sit there and watch a movie, and the entire movie would almost reformulate itself. Like, there was the one essay called Me Before You, and it was that movie after the book. You know, I don't know if you know the book Me Before You. And I just saw it through the lens of my new kind of clarity. So kind of everything, there was this thread running, getting past, and so that's kind of reflected in the blogs. So that, in short, I think was the inspiration for writing the Peaches book.
I know what you mean about the title, Terry, because before I'd seen it or picked it up or anything, when Ali mentioned the title, my first reaction is, oh, was that a children's book? Because it just had that feel to it, and of course it's nothing like that. So it's it appeals to the boys, but it's kind of, it's tricky, isn't it? Because what you want is people to pick something off a shelf, and it's not necessarily giving them the impression. But you know, once people know, then it's a wonderful book.
It went through many names. It was called, like, in nature, like stories of resilience, or, you know, it was all around resilience, because there was something I was seeing very deep around resilience. I'd always kind of related to resilience as a quality or as a thing or something personal. And through this learning, I was seeing that resilience is just almost a constant. It's a fact. It's the way that it's built into nature. It's built into life. It's built into, you know, kind of the universe. It's part of the DNA of the universe. And so it's built into our psychological and spiritual workings. And so I was seeing resilience in a whole different way. It's almost like I saw, it's not something it's not about a feeling, and it's not about, you know, it's just something that's a fact. It's built into our psychological coding. And so I knew that so for a long time the book had titles around that. But then again, that fell away.
And I was actually talking to somebody this week about resilience, and I think that you're right. People have this understanding of resilience as resilience means that I never get upset about stuff, and that I'm always okay, and, you know, like the coconut. And you know, I used to think that, because I used to think that I wasn't very resilient because I burst into tears about stuff. But actually it kind of dawned on me later, at some point more recently, that bursting into tears was actually quite a good strategy, because I kind of got it all out of my system and then I was back again. Whereas, you know, others around me who maybe never burst into tears suddenly were holding all this stuff inside them, and, you know, it's actually got nothing to do with that. Exactly. So I would just love to hear you say something about, like, just speak to that bit about the coconut and the peach, and why it is that peach that thinks it isn't as resilient is actually as resilient as the coconut.
Well, I guess the way that I kind of, and I can't even remember that first essay entirely, but it was just the sense of, you know, when we don't understand, you know, what Sydney Banks to me uncovered is the fact of how the human experience works, and the fact that it's working through this power of thought, you know, this universal power that's almost like a life force, you know, just like gravity's a law or life force. There's a life force. It's not dependent on us. It has nothing to do with us, but it's bringing all our realities to life every moment. And when he uncovered that in the way that he articulated it, kind of, you know, bringing it into the psychological world, because other people have had a sense of this before, but it's been more in the spiritual world, you know, the world kind of spirituality or non-duality. But when he brought it in as psychological principles, he with that, you could see that resilience is part of who we are, because there is nothing outside of us, not circumstances, not our past, not our future, not our personalities, not our natures. There is nothing that can create an experience for us psychologically, or that can even impact us psychologically. It just doesn't work that way. It seems like it does, but it doesn't. So we're not vulnerable to anything in this kind of world around us, not our past, not our futures, all the things that we feel that we're vulnerable to, that we've been taught we're vulnerable to, that it's just that's just not true. And so as soon as all of that falls away, there's just this resilience, because you realize that the only thing that you're ever experiencing in any moment is this power of thought brought to life by consciousness in the moment. And that's all you ever, and that's good news, especially when you see what thought is. So there's a way that you can, if you see that in a moment, you go from feeling like a peach, it's all kind of squidgy, you know, and it just takes a little bit of rain to bruise you, you know, to kind of, so the analogy was that the peach has got a
Oh, I've lost Terry. Has anybody else?
Yeah, it's gone really, yeah.
Oh, I'll just wait and see.
Terry, you're frozen on us.
We can't hear you. Frozen in mid-gesture.
Yeah.
Just wait for the internet to catch up. Oh. Just send her a message.
Yeah, I'll just message her.
Are you messaging, Ali?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. Is everyone else moving?
Oh, oh no.
Oh,
she's back. She's back.
She's back. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Everyone
okay.
suddenly was looking so frozen.
And for us, you were the only one that looked frozen.
Oh, that's not good. I hope
so we heard you were just saying that, you know, the peach looks as if it can get bruised by just the slightest thing.
Yeah. And so, you know, so it's just seeing the fact that we aren't vulnerable to anything other than the only thing that's affecting or that's creating our psychological experience is this, you know, is this constant power, these principles. And, you know, when you realize that there's a psychological safety, that's you're inoculated, you know, we're all inoculated. And so, you know, in that way, resilience is part of the system. You know, we don't even have a choice about that. We are resilient, whether we feel our resilience or not. You know, that's a different story. Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't. But the fact of it, it is a resilient system. It's a resilient paradigm. That's the way it was designed, and that's a cool thing to know for all people, I think.
And you know, it seems strange to me, it often occurs to me how strange it is that a system like that is so flawless can then have as part of it the fact that most people have no idea that it even exists, and that, you know, that resilience might be a fact, but it doesn't seem to be that helpful to a lot of people until they realize it's a fact. And that looks a bit like a flaw in the system.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's you know, I was just giving a foundation course today, and we often tell the story of germ theory, you know, and how germs were invisible. And when something's invisible, as human beings, we just have a long history of overlooking things that we can't see, which kind of makes sense, you know. So when none of us can see, we've got this great slide we saw the kids, which is called the fish in water, and it's got a frog saying to a fish, "How's the water?" And the fish is saying, "What's water?" Like he doesn't even know what water is, but meanwhile he's surrounded with it. You know, we're living in this world of thought, and we have no idea because it's invisible. So as soon as we feel something, we look around us. We think, "Why am I feeling that?" You know, and then my husband just walked past and didn't take out the dustbin. It must be him. You know, or this happened yesterday, you know, and I'm feeling a bit bad. It must be that. And so we look to what we can see. And that's always been the way of history, because that's how we thought the world was flat. That's how we thought the Earth was the center of the solar system. It doesn't look like we're the ones moving around the sun. So we you know, and I think that the human experience is the most deceptive of all of them. Because even though all of us here are sitting and learning about it, it's a truth, it's something that we've learned, we've had insight about, we forget it every day. You know, we forget it every day, we forget it. So, you know, it's not like we forget gravity and just think, you know, I'm just going to jump out the window for a second because I'm late, you know, to get into my car and it's quicker. You know, we always taking it into account. But somehow this one is so deceptive. And I guess that's really humbling, and it seems to be part of the system. This is just what I think, this is just my opinion, that almost like it's meant to be deceptive, because it seems to be part of it that we do sometimes see it and we sometimes don't. You know, so that's another observation that we teach the kids, or you know, that sometimes you're going to see it, sometimes you're not, and you don't need to judge yourself. Just know that that's how it works. You don't always see it.
Please chip in, anybody who'd like to ask a question. Just put your hand up and I'll unmute you. Or
I just unmuted myself. It seems to me that if we didn't forget it, sometimes there's a lot of life we wouldn't be able to enjoy. We couldn't watch a movie, for instance, and really get caught up in it if we didn't forget that it can affect us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I mean, I think one of the things that I was actually talking to a friend about today, I don't have a problem with not understanding, you know, with understanding why the system works like it does, so many things about it. I mean, I feel like I know nothing, I understand nothing, and I love that. Because if it is an intelligently designed system, I call it a God system, or a pre-existing system. It's got pre-existing intelligence. The fact that my little human mind can't comprehend it or understand it or figure it out is a good thing. If I could, then I would be very worried about the system, you know, because kind of human created systems have limitations to them, you know, even though we are connected to this intelligence. But this pure intelligently designed system is one that is the perfection of it, and the intricacy of it is so beyond what we can understand. And I think that that's beautiful. You know, that's exactly how I'd want it to be. So as you say, Judy, rightly, there's so many things about it which we can't even appreciate, or just as they're meant to be, you know. So that's an example.
I really want to ask a question. I'm not quite even sure how to ask it, but about thoughts. But because there were things in this book, Terry, that I read and I thought, you know, because I'm a coach, obviously, and I read them and I just thought, I can't see what she's getting at there, and so I want to go back and read the whole thing again. And so I would just love to hear you talk about. So I understand exactly what you mean about, you know, some random thought comes into our head and we, you know, the husband and the dustbin, you know, walk past and we're like, yeah, it must be you that's making me feel bad. But sometimes it, you know, it's so often it really looks as if it's the thought that comes into our head is connected with something that's already happening. And it's, you know, and it's this feeling, you know, and I often, you know, clients very often say this to me, this sort of, well, I wouldn't be thinking that thing had that other circumstance not just happened. You know, had my mother-in-law not just died, then I wouldn't be thinking about that. And it's that, you know, so I think what I struggle with is that this idea of the randomness of thought, that just the sort of the fact that it's just that it's impersonal and it's almost got nothing to do with, you know, what's going on around us.
You see, I don't understand, or the way I see it is I don't feel like it's just random. I mean, it's obviously not random, because you've just said, and that's true, that if someone's died, you're thinking about their death. So it's not random. I mean, first of all, thought is intelligent by nature, and everything's anyhow interconnected. You know, we see there's thought and then there's circumstance. We see them, you know, as separate, but because everything's interconnected and it's all running through this intelligence, it makes sense that our thinking is going to be related to the world around us, you know. So it's hard to even talk about these things because we're seeing it as me and then a separate world and etc. And so, but it makes sense that if thought is intelligent, right, if there's an intelligence through thought, that it's going to connect to my life. If it wasn't intelligence, then my mother would die and I wouldn't know, and I think she's alive, you know. So the fact that thought is intelligence, is responsive to life, you know, that's the thing about thought, is that it's responsive to life in the moment. So there's a correlation between thinking and our lives. It's just that between thinking and our circumstances, but our circumstances don't dictate how we will think or feel. So there's a connection with the two, but the one is not the source of the other. It's not, you know, it's not dictating in any way. So because a circumstance happens, you know, the mind's free to make anything of it, which we see. We've got this great exercise where, you know, where we get all the students to hold up different emoji cards, different feelings. They've got like 8 feelings, and we show a slide and they all hold up a feeling. And you just see this like array, even something like a scary tarantula. You see some people put peaceful, and some people put happy, and some people put terrified, and they're all holding up different ones. And you just see, well, where's the experience coming from? It's all about the spider in relation to the spider, but you see that it's the spider's not in any way dictating or influencing what they think and feel, their experience. So you see that there's not a kind of a link between that, but there is, as you say, a correlation that we're thinking about, you know, not all the time, but a lot of the time our minds, especially when they're present, are responsive to our lives, you know. And I think that's one of the attributes of thought, is that it is responsive to life in the moment, you know, especially when we're present, which is as it should be.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. I just realized as you were answering that how, you know, that word random is a word that I've heard other people use about thought, and it's never made any sense to me. And it's how you explained it there is so much, makes much better sense to me. Thank you. Ali, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I just realised that. The use of the word random, I've had the same experience where it's just, and that's just too much of a stretch for people as well. It's just too, people are never going to believe that it's random because it isn't. Yeah, it just can't be. Yeah.
I think also one of the things that I wanted to get across in this book is that I saw that even in kind of the principle world, there was a lot of confusion around like thought as a principle, you know, as opposed to the content of our thinking as a constant, as a principle. And there was a lot of there was a lot of confusion. People were still, a lot like CBT does in NLP in the world of psychology, giving thought a bad rap, you know, as if it was bad, as if we wanted it to go away, we wanted to let go of it, and we wanted to ignore it, and we wanted to almost like let it fall away so that we could just be our pure selves. And it was almost like thought was something that was getting in the way of us feeling peaceful or something. And And, you know, the one thing I'd always appreciated when I first heard Sid speak about thought as a principle, as a fact, as a constant, as kind of almost this neutral law that brought all experience to life, and not even human experience, you can go even more, and you can say, you know, you can go further than just human experience, but that's the one I'm kind of the most interested in, was that he spoke about it with a respect and an awe. He spoke about it as a gift. And that's the way I've always seen it, because if you take away like the fact of thought as we talk about it, you know, as a principle, there is no experience. There's no reality for me. There's no life for me. You know, there's a world of maybe, you know, I'm going to make the assumption just in my personal opinion there is, but I won't have any experience of it. And so the fact that thought brings my experience to life, that it creates reality for me moment to moment, this fact of thought, to me is a beautiful thing. It's an absolute gift. And I kind of felt like thought was getting a bit of a bad rap, you know, and I think when any moment that we see, we factor in thought to our experience, that it's creating our feeling, that's creating our experience in the moment, we do it. I just kind of feel like there's a freedom that comes with that. There's a freedom that comes with that. Things fall into place. That's a beautiful thing. There's never a need for it to be any other way. You know, it's like we just kind of align with reality. Like to me, like that's when I feel people align with reality, align with truth. So there was just something about, I felt like I'd seen something a little bit deeper, which I tried to articulate in some of the essays. Is thought bad? Thought is a constant. Just talk about thought in a way that I felt like was a little bit sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes being lost in translation. So,
because I think when we hear that word thought, we think about the kind of activity,
yes,
and it's difficult to kind of get to grips with thought as a principle. It's, you know, as you say, it's like the fish in water. It's, you just can't see it.
Yeah.
So we then pin it onto something we know. Oh, I know what thought is, and we kind of
Yes.
go back to that, keep going back to that, what I think thought is. And for me, I think I know I do that, and that the two are still quite mingled. And sometimes I see it, but quite a lot of the time I don't.
Yeah. So it is, because it's difficult, because it's a word that we're familiar with, you know. So even when you know, nowhere in our curriculum when we teach the kids do we ever talk about thoughts coming and going. You know, we differentiate between thinking and thought, but the power of thought doesn't come and go. It's like saying that gravity comes and goes. You know, gravity doesn't come and go. Gravity is always there. It's a fact, and thought doesn't come and go. You know, it's not transient. It's the fact of thought as a power. I mean, you know, so we do lots of exercises with the kids. Can we switch this power off? And they come out, you know, saying, no, we can't, because we do experiments with it. Can't switch gravity off too. You can't. It's there. It exists in the world. And so they kind of see how, like, we just really try and talk about it in a way that's so different and so big. And like I think that's cool, because I think that if we are going to be teaching kids a new paradigm, we've got to redefine language. You know, even as I say, the language of what resilience means. Like, to me, resilience doesn't mean feeling resilient or having a good feeling or feeling like you can cope with life or bouncing back up. It's something far deeper. And I think, like, when we use these words, we've got to almost redefine them when there's a new paradigm, because a new paradigm has new language. Certain language has to fall away, you know, because it was created by a false paradigm. You know, even like personality, like I really believe that in decades to come, no one will use that word anymore, personality, because it was created by a false psychological paradigm. So there's that kind of new language, and even the language we have is going to have to be redefined, you know, which is challenging, but it needs to be done.
Helen, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi there. Yeah, I was really interested in your question, Lizzie, and I was really interested in your response, Terry, and it got me thinking, and I just wanted to explore that a bit more. And he was saying if you show people a picture of a hairy spider, some of them will say, I feel peaceful, some of them will say, I feel terrified. And so if you get 10 different responses, you can say the spider doesn't produce the same response in everybody. Mm-hmm. But where my head went was, well, what if the person who holds up terrified is always going to hold up terrified? The spider is going to consistently make that person terrified, although it'll consistently make the other person feel peaceful. Which just made me, I know it's just an intellectual questioning, but just questioning the business about your feelings aren't coming from out there, but if your feelings are consistent about a spider or your husband or whatever, it seems to consistently provoke a feeling. Mm-hmm. I've got myself in a bit of a tangle there trying to work out.
No, well, you see, Helen, that's what's confusing to people. That's exactly what's confusing, and that's why it's so deceptive, because there will be certain people or situations where you'll always feel the same way. So that's what makes it feel to us like it must be that, because I'm having this consistent experience. And that's one of the things, like in the journey that we take students with, we let them almost just dawn on them that it can't be the thing that's creating the feeling, because if it was, it would have to create it in everybody. So how's it possible that he's feeling something different? How's that possible?
Do you think Do you think it necessarily has to create the same feeling in everybody for a feeling to come from outside? Is it not just...
What occurs to me for that, Helen, I think is maybe where you're going with that is the sort of, something physical or chemical doesn't have the same effect on everybody necessarily. Yeah. I think that's where my intellect goes with that. Somebody tastes chili and goes, that's nice, and someone else goes, oh, that's blown my head off. And it's that kind of parallel that
exactly right. So the chili has a different effect on different people, but for one person they'll say never ever again, and someone else will put it in everything they make.
I think there's something about, every human being obviously has to insightfully see this, but the fact that you cannot have experience without thought. So you can't experience that chili. You could put it in your mouth, but you couldn't have an experience of it, because to me it's not about what you actually feel. It's not a problem if you feel scared of the spider, if you don't like spiders. It's not a problem what you experience. It's just interesting to see the fact a human being doesn't feel victimized when they realize the fact that it's a thought-created experience, not a spider-created experience. So we're not telling people that they should like the spider or that they should feel. We're just saying to them that it's not coming from the spider. And that also, because that's true, what it does is it opens up the mind, and the mind almost feels free, if necessary, to give them another experience. So people do change their minds. How does that happen? Because the mind, if it needs to. So I always feel like we don't know. There's not like there's a correct response. When we first used to teach the principles, it's almost like we used to teach it in a way that if you really understood this, you would just feel well-being no matter what was going on. Like you'd love spiders, and your kid would get sick and you'd just be calm. And, it was almost like, and that wasn't true or correct, because I don't know what's appropriate to feel in the moment. It could be that it's appropriate to be in deep grief when my child's ill, or etc. So it's not about like, we don't know what experience is appropriate, but to understand how it's being created, there's something about that, because it's true. And when we are aligned with truth, then our mind is working from a logic that's true. So I always say, like, the mind will run with whatever logic you give it. So if you tell the mind, if you come from the belief that your husband's making you feel the way, the mind will give you all the evidence and they'll run with it, right? Yeah. That's what the mind does. It just, you put whatever logic you put in, it will go with it. So if we put false logic into it, it will just think from the false logic. It will just create tree branches. When you're coming from a true logic, there's an intelligence that's informing it, because it's truthful. So the mind's thinking in a way that's going to be helpful to us. But at the same time, You know, it's just it's not saying that we should think in any particular way or feel any particular thing. So
Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah.
you're welcome.
And then I guess it's about realizing that you can just feel all those things and not trying to make it different.
Exactly.
I think that's that's the thing that strikes me again and again every time I think about it is, Sid's, if the one thing we learned was not to be afraid of our experience, that would change the world. And I hear that really, really deeply. Because we just, I'm terrified of tarantulas and I don't want to be. So I've got to, change the tarantulas or change my situation so that I never have to be near one or whatever it is. And, that's difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that's part of, we've got this very sweet video that we show, which is it's these little kids on YouTube, and it's like kind of quite cruel but quite funny at the same time. It's these little toddlers who are frightened of their shadows, so they kind of like walking along and then they see their shadows and they kind of looking at it and then they start to run and the shadow follows them and they get hysterical, because it's like almost like you can't get away from this monster, and they start to scream. And like the person filming them, obviously their parents, is like so sadistic because they like think it's really funny and they're capturing it, and this pure like little thing is like terrified of their own shadow. So we use that as a kind of a metaphor, because that's how we are with feelings, right? So we want to change our feelings, we want to run away from them, change our thinking so we can change our feelings. We want to do anything to get away. But when you understand that feelings, the felt sensation of thought, it's the shadow of thought, like that's all, that's what it is, then it just kind of frees you to feel. And to me, like one of the biggest problems with the current young generation, and of course old generation too, but it's so visible with our youth, is that they're terrified of feeling. So we're all just trying to suppress our feelings. We're trying to run, whatever it is, doesn't matter if it's social media or, Fortnite or drugs or whatever it is, or eating or just anything not to feel. And and so we kind of, that's one of the things I think as human beings, that we feeling creatures. It's beautiful to feel. It's just the shadow of thought. And so there's nothing wrong with any particular feeling. It's like so I think that's something, again, that we come in thinking we're going to learn about the principles and then we're going to feel better or something, like what does that mean? So there's a resilience that a human being can have in the presence of any feeling, if you understand what feeling is. So then there's a resilience to just feel, just like when we were little. We never sat there and felt bad, had a tantrum and thought, what's wrong with me? Am I, do I need medication, or do I need a different family? But have I got a bad mom? We just felt. We're very resilient to feelings. So, yeah.
Would anybody else like to ask something? Or the materials for your program, Helen, I'll come back to you, but the materials for your program sound amazing, Terry. Are they accessible, or are they just available to your trainers? Are they accessible to the rest of us?
No, they're not accessible, just because we probably put about £100,000 into the materials, and we're constantly updating them. Like even since you probably saw them, Ali, they've been so updated. And so you've got to kind of become part of the iHeart Association, kind of train in the curriculum, and then you have access to them. And because they're also only, even our iHeart facilitators, there's terms and conditions, because it's been trademarked, that you can only use it for young people in groups, in certain settings, not just like anybody, because, otherwise we'd give it away for much more. but we're making it accessible to people for what we think is a very reasonable price, because we wanted to get to the young people. So, and also it's all been designed, the activities and everything, for a group of young people. That's how we've kind of designed it. So that's when we know the impact will be the best.
Yes, yes. Well, please do share with me and Ali afterwards, you know, how that works, and we'd be happy to kind of circulate it amongst everyone in this group.
Absolutely.
Helen,
Absolutely.
go ahead. Oh, I thought I muted you, but
yeah, this is it's just to get a different perspective, Terry. This might be something that other people in the group have heard me mention before, but I have trouble with this one. So if I have a period of low mood, and I can understand that that isn't a problem. I don't have to be happy all the time. It isn't a problem if thoughts are producing feelings which are, you know, low moodish, a bit antisocial. But then I can never quite logic my way through feeling bad about inflicting that on other people. I say inflicting in inverted commas, you know, people have to share my space, or we share space together. Logically, I know, or according to the principles, I know that I'm not producing their feelings, but it all just feels like I must be, even though I kind of think I know I'm not. So have you got any helpful perspective on that?
So I heard what you described, but is there a specific question, or you're asking me just to speak around that?
I think it's just speaking around that. I find that a low mood sort of prolongs itself because of the guilt that comes with it, because I'm making other people's experience miserable.
Yeah. So you see, one of the things is that I don't really, again, like I'm trying to figure out in my mind when you say low mood, because I can't really relate to what that means anymore. Not that I don't feel what you would call a low mood, it's just the languaging around that's changed for me, because it's like I know I can feel low on kind of both sides of the line, and by that I mean understanding where my experience is coming from, I can feel low, and not knowing where my experience comes from, so that it feels like there's something going on in my life, in my, you know, it's just so I can have that experience on both sides, and on the one there's a resilience in that, and there's just it's just a different come from, and on the other there's not. So and when I don't know, and I mean truly know, understand insightfully where my experience is coming from, and I'm feeling low, then you are going to judge yourself, because that's one of the trajectories. Remember I said that the mind follows the logic. You are going to judge yourself, and you are going to feel bad about it, because you know that's just the trajectory the mind follows. And so that, you know, that's just part of it, and you don't have to feel bad about that. It's just almost an implication of not seeing where your experience comes from. You start to judge yourself, start to feel bad, etc. So, you know, on the other side you can feel low, but there's a way that the judgment's not there, you know, so etc.
Yes.
You know, and again I also feel like you can't, there's almost like, again, like one of the things I've seen, especially with the clients in our center, which I've been so pleased about, because a lot of people come and learn with us around our center, is that people are starting to judge themselves much, much less for being what I call outside the logic of the principles. We call that being outside of the logic. They don't see that that's a bad thing, and that it's a good thing to be inside of the logic. They just see that it's a different thing. And when you're outside of the logic, there's a way that your mind starts to go into the specific. You're more reactive. You know, as you say, you give the people around you a hard time. You judge yourself. There's a multiplication of thinking. There's a logic, an illogic that the mind's following, and they almost just see the, you know, and I don't even know if this word is very misunderstood, but the innocence of that. It's almost like if you think the world is flat, then it looks responsible to worry about falling off the edge. It's not stupid and it's not ridiculous. It's responsible. You're protecting yourself. Thinking about like what you're going to do not to fall off is actually really responsible. So when your mind's thinking in a way that is coming from a faulty logic, it's doing everything it can that looks right to it. And that's why we kind of do all the crazy things we do, or criticize or judge or be mean or whatever, because that's just the way that the mind's working. You know, it's just following a certain logic. So
that's really interesting. Thank you.
And of course we're accountable for our own minds, but it's really just, you know, it's nothing that we want to do, or we bad people, or we stupid because we forgotten it's just that you can't go against what the mind's seeing, you know, and that's what it's seeing.
That's really interesting. Thank you. Yeah. Oh.
Terry's got a little friend there.
I know, how cute.
He doesn't speak on demand, but do you have something to say?
Yeah, a question.
He wants to
He
get
wants to
involved.
nuzzle. I do have what I've been exploring of late, it feels like it holds the whole conversation, is this present moment experience, that the now is all we ever have. And that means now, right now in this conversation. So while everybody's been talking, I've been aware of commentary going on in my head, and there's talking going on, and questions will pop up, and ideas, or something I need to correct somebody on comes up, and all this stuff. And I realize it's happening all in the middle of this now moment of all is well. So for me, it's been an interesting thing how powerful this is, how everything falls away right now, and we just are, and all is well. So the conversation is all happening within this now moment. So that's it's interesting, because in the principles community, you can liken it to mind, and mind holds it all. It's not even a principle, it just is what is. And then we play around with all this other stuff within the knowing of all is well. So that he knows everything's okay. So it's always interesting to come into these conversations now with this perspective of the awareness of now and what's actually going on. You know, everything lives within it: resilience, thought, recognition of thought, relationship, cats, and everything collapses within it too.
Yeah.
So it's something that I'm feeling very drawn into sharing in the moment with whatever conversation I'm in. So that's why I'm perking up here with this. Tucker reminded me. So
that's beautiful. You know, Sid used to talk a lot about the now. I mean, most spiritual teachers do. You know, they hint, they talk, they point to it, and I think it's really interesting. And there are different ways, as you say, to talk about it. But there's something about this learning that does seem to collapse something that kind of brings us into focus with the now. But then there's something, like you're saying, that the now's the only thing that exists, right? So, you know, so even that, it's a really kind of deep conversation. But what I love about the principles, and this is why for me personally, and it's different for every other person, because I've seen in the world of sharing truth, or how, you know, something about human nature or our spiritual essence, people have different paths to follow that are their paths that feel intuitive for them, different language, different ways of sharing, lots of different spiritual teachers, spiritual/psychological teachers, and every person's got to find their articulation. I fell in love with the principles, you know, as a kind of platform, because I felt that it made things that had kind of been kept in the hands of spiritual teachers and people who were interested in the spiritual world, had that kind of orientation. I felt like it took it out of them and gave it to like the common people, like that we could go and talk about it to school kids, to 18-year-olds, you know, to kind of, you know, last night we were in Brighton teaching it to 16-year-old football girls, you know, girls, and they just love it, and they're in the conversation, and they can see something about the now, as you say, you know, they can see something about, like, that's where they feel their well-being. They can have a conversation about it. You know, the same when an hour ago they were talking about gaming or something, or winning a game, or playing Manchester City or something, you know, in the cup final. And it just becomes such a practical conversation that feels like everybody can have it, not just the people who've got a spiritual orientation or an orientation towards that kind of conversation. So, like, that's what I loved about the principles, where I kind of felt they were for, like, the common people, like including me, but like, just, you know, and maybe I had more of that. I could read spiritual books and enjoy them, but I felt like I could talk to my kids, and some of my boys are so not interested in that, but they could, it was relatable, you know. So these kind of deep concepts like you talking about, Terry, which are so deep they can kind of blow our minds, and when you talk, that's so beautiful. We can now have those conversations with anybody, and that's what's so cool.
And it's all happening in the moment. It's like just perfection is crazy amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And, you know, I think what you said there, Terry, is just so important, isn't it? Because, you know, I'm part of a church community, as I know you are, and a religious community, and it's kind of, it's just, I think almost the religious communities are forgetting how to talk about that stuff. And most people, that's my experience, my personal experience. And I think lots of people don't want to get involved in a religious group because it doesn't seem to have, it's not giving them what they need. And yet, you know, this sort of talk of people aren't interested in that, I just don't think that's true at all. People are really interested in, you know, who they really are and how life works and how their mind works and what they're connected to. But to me, you know, certainly the Christian church isn't really meeting people's needs in that anymore, and to have this kind of something that's out there for everybody, and it's not, you know, it's not sort of divided up in any way, it's just for everybody, is just priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we've come to 9 o'clock, and thank you so much, Terry, for joining us. That's been a really wonderful conversation, and I feel very lucky to have been part of it, and I'm sure the others will really enjoy catching up as well. And please do share anything that you would like to share with the rest of the group, and, you know, send us any links that you have to things that might be of interest. And it's been a real pleasure joining you this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terry.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for inviting me, Ellie. It was about a long time ago.
It was. It happened.
Making this happen.
You are a very busy woman.
A long time ago. We didn't let that one go, so thanks. And thanks to everybody. Thank you. I really enjoyed this. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.